Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? We're tackling something that's really in the news right now, and it's a big one, and that is the unitary executive theory.
Oh yeah, definitely a hot topic.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going to get into this with some help from an interview with Dr. Graham Dodds, a presidential historian. He was featured on the American History Hit podcast.
Great podcasts.
Yeah. And so this theory basically suggests that the president should have total control over the whole executive branch. So every agency, every official answers directly to them. So think about that for a minute. That's a lot of power.
It is. And, it's really interesting you say that about it being in the news because while this theory has historical roots, it's really making a comeback in modern politics, with the election coming up.
Yeah, that's right. The 2025 election is right around the corner, and this theory is definitely part of the conversation. So let's break it down. Where does this idea of a super powerful president even come from?
Well, you actually might be surprised to learn that it goes all the way back to the founding fathers, specifically Alexander Hamilton. And he even uses the term unitary executive in Federalist Paper number 70.
Wow, so this isn't some newfangled idea. It's been around since the very beginning.
Exactly. It's been there simmering in the background of American politics for centuries.
So Hamilton's vision for a strong executive, what was the thinking behind that?
Right. So remember, the founding fathers were kind of reacting to the Articles of Confederation, which, had a very weak executive branch, and they really want to avoid repeating that.
Yeah.
So they wanted to make sure the president could effectively lead the country, particularly in times of crisis.
Right. So was Hamilton basically advocating for a king instead of a president?
No, not exactly. He argued for what he called an energetic executive, someone who could act decisively, but still within a system of checks and balances.
Okay. So how does that translate to the Constitution itself? I mean, where do people who support this theory find justification for a president having that much power?
Well, they point to three main parts of Article 2. First, you've got the vesting clause, which states that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America.
Sounds straightforward enough.
Right. But, and here's the catch, it's that word vested that sparks a lot of debate. Does it just mean that the president holds executive power, or does it mean they control all of it? You see, that's a big difference.
I see what you mean. So the interpretation is everything.
Yeah, and that's where things get tricky. What are the other parts of Article 2? Well, you've got the oath of office, where the president swears to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And supporters of the unitary executive theory say this means the president has a unique responsibility to ensure the government is acting constitutionally.
So are they suggesting that the president gets to decide what is or isn't constitutional?
That's a huge question, and one that critics of the theory bring up a lot. Then there's the take care clause, which says that the president must take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And again, those who favor a strong unitary executive will say this gives the president broad power to interpret and enforce laws as they see fit.
So we've got three seemingly simple phrases in the Constitution, but the way you interpret them can totally change how much power the president has. That's fascinating.
It is. And it's not just a theoretical debate. These interpretations have had real-world consequences shaping the balance of power between the branches of government, over time.
So how has this theory evolved over time? Has it always been such a controversial topic?
Well, it hasn't always been front and center. While the idea has been around since the founding of the country, it really gained momentum in the 20th century, particularly with President Reagan.
Reagan. So his administration really embraced this theory.
They did. They saw the unitary executive theory as a way to strengthen the presidency, push back against what they perceived as an overly powerful federal bureaucracy.
Right. And then, of course, you can't talk about the unitary executive theory without mentioning Dick Cheney. Right, he was all about executive power, especially during the George W. Bush administration.
Yeah, he really picked up that torch from Reagan building on that approach. Cheney very vocally advocated for expanding presidential authority, especially after 9/11 and during the War on Terror. He argued that Congress had too much power after Watergate, and the president needed more authority to act quickly and decisively on matters of national security.
Right, and so this sets the stage for later presidents. Then we enter the Trump era. How did his actions and rhetoric sort of line up with this theory?
Well, Trump's approach to governing definitely had elements of this theory at play, even if he didn't always explicitly use the term. His habit of firing officials, his constant talk about the deep state, his attempt to implement Schedule F, it all pointed to this desire for more control over the executive branch.
Wait, you said Schedule F. What's that?
Right. So Schedule F was an executive order that Trump tried to put into place. It would reclassify thousands of federal workers, taking away their civil service protections and making it much easier to fire them.
So basically, he could have gotten rid of anyone he saw as disloyal or not on board with his agenda.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It goes right to the heart of this idea that the president should have total control over who's working in the executive branch and be able to shape it according to their vision.
Okay, so we've talked about how this theory has been embraced by various presidents, but I'm guessing there's a whole other side to this story, right? Some strong arguments against the unitary executive theory.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
There are some really big concerns about what could happen if a president had this much power. Critics will say it throws off the whole balance of power that our democracy is built on, that balance between the different branches of government.
Right, so it's not just about who's in the Oval Office, it's about the system itself and whether it can actually handle a president who thinks they have this unchecked authority.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really real for all of us listening. Think about it. If a president truly believes they have ultimate control over the entire executive branch, what's to stop them from just ignoring expert advice or silencing anyone in those agencies who disagrees with them? Or even worse, using all that power for their own personal gain.
That's a little scary. Are there any real-world examples of how this could actually play out and affect people's lives?
Well, let's say you've got a president who really buys into the unitary executive theory. And let's say they get intelligence reports that don't fit with what they already believe or what's good for them politically. What's to stop them from just tossing those reports aside? They could say, well, I'm the president. I'm the ultimate authority on national security, so my gut feeling trumps whatever those intelligence experts are saying.
Wow. That's a chilling thought. And it's not like it's totally out there. We've seen presidents make decisions in the name of national security that later on people were like, wait a minute, what was that about?
Exactly. And that brings up another big worry, accountability. If a president can just act on their own without any real oversight from Congress or the courts, who's going to hold them responsible when things go wrong?
So you're saying it could become a situation where the president is basically above the law, at least when it comes to things they do within the executive branch?
That's a huge criticism of the unitary executive theory. Critics say it creates a system where the president isn't really answerable to the people, and that makes them more likely to become corrupt or abuse their power.
Right. And this isn't just some abstract political theory. This is about how our government actually functions, what policies get made, and how those policies affect our everyday lives.
It really boils down to what kind of democracy we want. Do we want one where all the power is concentrated in the hands of one person? Or do we want a system with strong checks and balances to make sure no one gets too powerful?
It's a big question and one we all need to think about, especially with the 2025 election coming up. This isn't just some academic debate. It's about the future of our country and the kind of government we want to have.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not just about the presidency itself, this unitary executive theory. It also has implications for the entire federal bureaucracy. All those government agencies that are supposed to be putting policies into action and serving the public.
Right. So how could this theory actually change the way those agencies work and the services they provide?
Well, one concern is that it could turn the whole federal workforce into something that's more about politics than anything else. If a president really believes they have the final say over every single person working in those agencies, they might start choosing people based on loyalty instead of, competence or experience.
That's a scary thought. I mean, we depend on those agencies for so many essential things, everything from protecting the environment to healthcare to national security.
Exactly. And if you politicize the bureaucracy, it can make those agencies a lot less effective, and people start losing trust in the whole system.
It's like saying, okay, let's get rid of all the experts and replace them with political appointees who might not even know how to do the job. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
And it raises questions about whether things will be done fairly. What if a president sees the whole executive branch as their own personal playground? They might be tempted to use all those resources to benefit themselves or punish anyone they see as an enemy.
I mean, we've seen hints of that happening recently with accusations that presidents have used their power to reward their friends and silence their critics. That's not a good road to go down.
No, it's not. And the unitary executive theory almost gives them a justification for acting that way. It's like saying, well, the president's above the law as long as it's within the executive branch. And that's a really slippery slope that could lead us towards authoritarianism.
So what do we do? It can feel overwhelming to think about these big systemic problems, especially during an election year.
The most important thing is to stay informed. Don't let all this complexity scare you away. Learn about the unitary executive theory. Figure out what the arguments are on both sides and think about how it could affect the policies of the candidates you're thinking about voting for.
So it's about making those connections between these big abstract ideas and how they could actually affect our lives.
Right.
Like asking ourselves, okay, if this candidate believes in this theory, how are they going to approach climate change or healthcare or immigration? Those are the things that really matter to people.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask the candidates those tough questions. Push them on their views about executive power and checks and balances and whether there should be any limits on what a president can do. These are fundamental questions that deserve serious answers.
It's our job as citizens to participate in these conversations and hold our leaders accountable. Our voices matter, and so do our votes. So we've explored this theory, its history, and, all the concerns around it. But it can't all be bad news, right? Are there ways to make sure this theory doesn't give the president too much power? Like some kind of safeguards or alternatives?
Definitely. One of the most important things is a strong and assertive Congress.
Yeah.
The founding fathers wanted Congress to be an equal branch of government, not just a puppet for the president.
So it's about bringing back that balance of power that we talked about earlier. But how can Congress actually stand up to a president who really believes in this theory and thinks they can do whatever they want?
Well, it takes more than just wanting to do it. Congress has to be ready and able to really scrutinize everything the president does. They need to hold hearings and, if necessary, actually challenge the president's authority, maybe through new laws or even legal action.
I see. So it takes more than just talking the talk. They have to walk the walk. Are there any specific steps that could make Congress better at keeping the president in check?
Sure. One thing is making sure Congress has enough staff and resources to do their job properly. Strengthening those committees and trying to create more cooperation between the parties. It can't just be about scoring political points. Oversight has to be something they all agree is important.
Right. So it's about building a system where Congress can effectively check the president's power, not just complain about it on the sidelines. What about the courts? What role do they play in all of this? Can they stop a president who's really gung-ho about the unitary executive theory?
Absolutely. The courts, especially the Supreme Court, they're the guardians of the Constitution. They make sure the president is following the law. And we've seen times in the past where the Supreme Court has put limits on presidential power, even when things were really tense.
So it sounds like a strong, independent judiciary is really crucial to make sure no single branch of government gets too powerful. But it's not just about the branches of government, right? We, the people, have a role to play too.
You got it. An informed and engaged public, that's the best defense against any kind of tyranny, executive overreach included.
So being a good citizen isn't just about voting every 4 years. What can we do to stay informed and hold our leaders accountable?
Well, first, stay curious. Don't let all the complicated stuff scare you. Find good sources of information, talk about these things with people, and don't be shy about asking your elected officials those tough questions.
So it's about understanding the ideas and how they could affect our lives, and then making our voices heard, whether that's through voting or speaking out or even just having conversations with our friends and family.
Exactly. Remember, the Constitution is not some magical document that just takes care of itself. It takes all of us working together to make sure its principles are protected.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the unitary executive theory, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think it's this. To understand the challenges facing our democracy today, you have to understand this theory. It's about recognizing that executive power is important, but it has to be balanced with checks and balances. That's the only way to protect our freedoms and make sure our government is answerable to the people.
It's a good reminder that the future of our democracy is up to all of us. We have to stay informed. We have to get involved. And we have to be willing to stand up for the principles of our Constitution.
Well said. Knowledge is power. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. That's what the deep dive is all about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new about this complex and important topic. Until next time, keep diving deep.